Racist cops have fun touching the skirt of a black woman, then realize too late, she's a CIA agent. Before we dive into this powerful story of justice, let us know where you're watching from, and if you believe in exposing the truth and holding the powerful accountable, hit that subscribe button. Together, we can make sure this story reaches the world and sparks real change. Now sit back and witness the story unfold. Angela Hayes pushed open the door of Rustwood Diner, stepping into the thick scent of burnt coffee and greasy bacon. The low hum of morning chatter stuttered, then faltered. Forks clinked awkwardly against plates. A creeping silence settled over the diner like a thick fog. She felt it immediately, the weight of their stares. Not the fleeting glances of curiosity, but something heavier, sharper, hostile. She didn't react. She had been in places like this before. Rustwood was the kind of town that thrived on familiarity. Outsiders were a disruption, an anomaly. And a black woman, dressed in a sharp navy dress, walking in with the confidence of someone who belonged? That was a provocation. Angela moved toward an empty booth by the window, her heels clicking against the worn linoleum floor. Unbothered, unaffected. But across the room, two men at the counter weren't so willing to let her go unnoticed. Bradley and Jenkins, Rustwood's enforcers, the law only when it suited them. They had ruled this town for years, thriving on fear. Bradley broad, brutish. A bully in a uniform was already staring, a slow, creeping smirk curling at the edge of his lips. Jenkins, leaner but just as cruel, nudged him with his elbow, whispering something that made them both chuckle. Angela had no interest in their game, but they were already playing. Well, well, Bradley's voice sliced through the quiet, thick with amusement. Ain't that something? Jenkins turned, his smirk widening. You lost, sweetheart. Angela didn't acknowledge them. She reached for the menu. That was her first mistake. Jenkins pushed back his chair, the legs scraping against the floor. His movements exaggerated, deliberate. He wanted everyone to watch, to know what was about to happen. Angela felt it, the shift in the room, the way the waitress behind the counter gripped her coffee pot tighter, the way the old man near the jukebox lowered his gaze. They all knew how this would go, because no one ever interfered. Jenkins stopped at her table, too close, his hands planted on the surface, leaning in just enough to invade her space. Where you from, huh? Don't see many like you around here. Angela lifted her gaze, cold, controlled. I'm just passing through. Jenkins' grin twisted. Passing through? That right? And then his hand moved. He grabbed the hem of her dress. Nice fabric, he murmured. Bet it cost more than I make in a month. Angela's fingers curled around her coffee mug. The diner held its breath. Jenkins smirked, waiting for a reaction. Angela gave him none, and so he reached for her dress again. That was his last mistake. Angela moved like lightning. Her hands shot out, clamping onto his wrist tight. Jenkins' smirk vanished. Before he could react, she twisted. A sickening pop filled the silence. Jenkins let out a strangled yelp, his body lurching forward. Angela didn't stop. She yanked him off balance, slamming his face into the table. Dishes shattered, coffee spilled. A gasp rippled through the diner. Bradley jerked upright, hand flying toward his holster. Angela was already moving. A swift kick to the chair beside her sent it crashing into his knees. He buckled, swearing, but still reached for his gun. Too slow. Angela's elbow struck his wrist. The gun clattered to the floor. Bradley froze. The entire diner did. Angela exhaled slowly, steady, unshaken. Then she reached into her jacket. Not for a weapon, for her badge. She flipped it open, the golden letters catching the dim light. CIA. The weight of it hit like a freight train. Bradley, still recovering, stared at the badge like it was a loaded gun. Jenkins, still on the floor, groaned, clutching his wrist. Angela leaned in slightly, her voice calm but razor-sharp. You just made the worst mistake of your life. Bradley's jaw clenched. Angela tilted her head. Try it, she murmured. He didn't. The diner remained frozen, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone like a storm about to break. Angela straightened. She didn't need to say anything else. She had already won. The waitress let out a shaky breath. A man in the far corner hurriedly pocketed his phone, screen still recording. Angela turned toward the door, but before she left, she paused. Without looking back, she spoke one final warning, one meant for the entire town. "You should have left me alone." Then Angela stepped out of the diner, leaving behind a room full of stunned faces and two humiliated men nursing their bruised egos. She had made her move, but she knew better than to believe it was over. In a town like Rustwood, defiance was never forgotten. It was punished. As she walked down the cracked pavement, the morning sun casting long shadows against rusting storefronts, she could feel at the shift, the invisible alarm that had just been triggered. She had disrupted the order of things, and in Rustwood, that was the kind of mistake that got people hurt. This wasn't just about two corrupt cops. This entire town was built on silence, on fear, on the unchecked power of men like Bradley and Jenkins. And now Angela Hayes had made herself their newest target. Rustwood was a town swallowed by silence, not the peaceful kind, the kind that wait on the streets, pressing against the walls of every home and business. The kind that warned people to keep their heads down, to not ask questions, to not challenge the ones who held power. Because in Rustwood, power belonged to Bradley and Jenkins. They weren't just cops, they were the law. No one questioned their authority. Not the mayor, who had long since learned that his title meant nothing. Not the business owners, who paid them in quiet bribes to keep their shops untouched. Not even the families who had lost sons and daughters to false charges or accidents because they knew that speaking up meant they might be next. Justice didn't exist here, only control. And now Angela Hayes had walked straight into the heart of it. She had seen corruption before. It was her job to hunt it down, to peel back the layers of rot hiding beneath polished badges. But Rustwood was different. The sickness here had spread too deep. It wasn't just a handful of dirty cops, it was an entire system built to protect them. For 3 days, Angela had blended in, watching from the shadows. She had taken careful notes, studied their patterns, identified the cracks in their armor. But she didn't have to dig deep to see the truth. Bradley and Jenkins didn't hide what they were. They strutted through town like kings, their uniforms nothing more than costumes disguising their true nature. Bullies, criminals, executioners in plain sight. They didn't just demand obedience, they demanded fear, and they had it. The people of Rustwood had been beaten into submission long before Angela arrived. She saw it in the way they avoided eye contact, the way they flinched when a patrol car rolled by, the way even the children knew better than to run too loudly in the streets. Rustwood was not a town, it was a prison without walls. Angela had come under the guise of an ordinary traveler, nothing more than a woman passing through. But blending in had never been her strength. She was too sharp, too poised, too sure of herself. And in a town like this, that was enough to make her dangerous. She had not come looking for trouble, but trouble had found her anyway. Angela walked down the dimly lit road, her instincts sharp, her pulse steady. Rustwood was quiet at this hour, too quiet. The air was thick with humidity, the scent of damp asphalt clinging to the night. A street lamp flickered ahead, casting long, uneven shadows along the cracked pavement. She had left the diner only hours ago, but she knew they wouldn't let it go. Bradley and Jenkins were men who thrived on control, and she had humiliated them in their own kingdom. Men like that didn't forget. They retaliated. She glanced over her shoulder. The street was empty. No headlights. No movement. But Angela had spent years hunting people who thought they were invisible. She knew when she was being followed. Her right hand hovered near the concealed knife strapped to her thigh. Her left curled into a loose fist, ready to react. If they came, they would regret not finishing their drinks at the diner and leaving her alone. But when the attack came, it wasn't from behind. A truck roared to life just ahead, its headlights bursting on, blinding her. Tires screeched as it swerved onto the road coming straight for her. Angela pivoted, sprinting toward the alleyway beside her. A heartbeat later, the truck skidded to a stop and doors slammed open. Boots hit the pavement hard. Shadows lunged from both sides of the alley. She spun, ducking the first swing of a baton, driving her elbow into the attacker's ribs. The man, big, stocky, clumsy, staggered back with a grunt, but another was already moving in. 2, 3, 4 of them. She kicked forward, aiming for the knee of the closest one. Direct hit. The man howled in pain, collapsing as she reached for the knife strapped to her thigh. Then something heavy cracked against the back of her skull. Her vision blurred. The ground tilted beneath her. A second hit. Her body folded. Knees hit the pavement first, then hands, the cold asphalt biting into her palms. She tried to push up. A boot slammed into her ribs, driving her flat onto the ground. Laughter. Familiar voices. Angela blinked, her vision swimming back into focus. And then she saw them. Bradley and Jenkins, standing just outside the halo of the streetlight, watching, smiling. "That's what I thought," Bradley muttered, stepping closer. Angela tried to rise, but rough hands grabbed her arms, wrenching them behind her. Cold metal snapped around her wrists. Jenkins crouched beside her, his grin a flash of white in the dark. "Not so tough now, huh?" he whispered. Angela stayed silent, her breathing steady, her rage colder than the steel cutting into her wrists. This wasn't over, not even close. The ride to the station was long, rough, and deliberate. They didn't just throw her in the back of the squad car, they shoved her in, slamming the door so hard the metal rattled. Bradley sat in the passenger seat, legs sprawled, looking relaxed, smug. Jenkins drove, humming an off-key tune under his breath. Angela kept her head tilted back, her wrists stiff against the cuffs. She refused to show pain, refused to show fear. The squad car pulled into the back entrance of the station, bypassing the main doors. No cameras, no witnesses. They weren't booking her. They were burying her. The door yanked open. Rough hands dragged her out. Her feet hit the pavement, knees threatening to buckle, but she stayed standing. They pushed her inside, down a dim hallway, past empty desks, past a wall of photographs. Rustwood's Most Wanted. Angela's eyes flicked toward it. A new printed photo had already been pinned up. Her face. Assault on a police officer. Resisting arrest. They had planned this. A cold rage settled in her stomach. They didn't just want to arrest her. They wanted to erase her. Hour later, Angela sat in darkness. The air inside the holding cell was thick with sweat, dust, and the faint metallic scent of dried blood. The walls, covered in peeling paint, seemed to press inward, swallowing the last remnants of light from the flickering bulb in the hallway outside. She had lost track of time, hours, days, maybe more. There was no clock, no sunlight, no way to mark the passage of time except for the sound of footsteps approaching, and they always came. Bradley and Jenkins, her tormentors, the ones who believed themselves to be untouchable. Angela sat with her back straight, wrists sore from the metal cuffs that had been removed hours ago, yet their imprint still burned into her skin. She had been trained for this. She had survived worse, but that didn't make the waiting any easier. Then came the sound she had learned to anticipate. Boots, heavy, slow, deliberate. The cell door groaned open, and the stale air shifted as Bradley stepped in first, followed by Jenkins. Their shadows loomed over her, stretching against the dim light from the hallway. "Still sitting pretty, huh?" Bradley sneered, crossing his arms. "Figured you'd be begging by now." Angela didn't move, didn't blink. Jenkins crouched, his smirk sharp and cutting. "I gotta admit, sweetheart, I'm impressed. You're tougher than most, but even tough things break." Angela's gaze didn't waver. "And weak men always think they're stronger than they are." Bradley's jaw tightened. The first hit came fast. A fist, sharp, brutal, straight to her ribs. Angela's body jerked, but she made no sound. She wouldn't give them that. Jenkins laughed, standing back up as Bradley shook out his fist like she was made of something harder than bone. "Still got a mouth on you, huh?" Bradley muttered. "Don't worry, we'll fix that." They didn't just want to hurt her, they wanted to break her. Bradley and Jenkins leaned against the walls, their arrogance thick, their power unchecked. "See, the thing is," Jenkins began, pacing in front of her, "people like you don't belong here. Never have, never will." Angela clenched her jaw. "Oh, she doesn't like that," Bradley mocked, nudging Jenkins with his elbow. "You think that fancy badge makes you better than us?" "She thought she could walk into our town and tell us how things are done," Jenkins scoffed, "like she owns the damn place." They had nothing, no charges, no real reason to hold her, so they created one. The way I see it, Bradley mused, you're just another criminal now. No one's coming for you. No one cares. Angela lifted her chin. You think you're the first corrupt cops I've put away? She said, voice steady despite the ache in her ribs. Bradley's eyes darkened. Another blow, this time to her face. Her head snapped sideways, the taste of copper flooding her mouth. Jenkins crouched again, his voice a whisper against her ear. You're alone, Angela. You don't get a phone call. You don't get rights. In this town, we decide what happens to you. Angela spit blood onto the floor between them. Then you're dumber than I thought. For the first time, Jenkins' smirk faded. Angela hadn't broken, and that terrified them. They left her in the dark. No food, no water, no sound except the occasional distant laughter of men who thought they had won. The cold crept into her bones, her muscles stiff, her body aching from the repeated beatings. But Angela wasn't afraid of the dark. She was patient, because she knew something they didn't. They had made a mistake, and she was going to make them pay for it. Angela Hayes sat in the cold, damp darkness of her cell, her body aching from the repeated beatings, her lips split, her ribs sore. The air was stale, thick with the stench of sweat, rust, and something deeper corruption, fear, control. The power that Bradley and Jenkins wielded was absolute within these walls, but they had underestimated something crucial. She was not broken. She was watching, learning, calculating. They thought she was just another victim, a name to be forgotten, a body to be discarded. They had stripped her of her badge, her weapons, and even her dignity, but they had left her mind intact, and that was a mistake they would soon regret. The first thing Angela did was stop fighting. Not physically, she would fight when the moment was right, but mentally she made herself small. She lowered her head, let her shoulders slump, let her bruises tell the story of a woman on the edge of defeat. It worked. The guards barely acknowledged her now. She was no longer a threat, just another prisoner to be ignored, which meant they stopped being careful. From her cell, Angela could hear everything. The way the officers spoke freely in the hallways, laughing about their latest abuses. The way Jenkins boasted about the lesson they had taught her, calling her every vile name he could think of, reveling in the idea that she was just another nobody now. And then there were the phone calls. Angela knew corruption ran deep in Rustwood, but what she overheard in those late-night calls sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the cold. I don't care how you do it, just get the shipment out before the feds start sniffing around. We already handled her. She's not going anywhere. No, the mayor's in on it. Don't worry about him. Just keep the payments on schedule. She memorized every name, every voice, every detail. Bradley and Jenkins weren't just crooked cops. They were part of something much bigger, and that meant Angela wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting to bring the whole system down. Angela played her role flawlessly. She let them think they had broken her. When Jenkins walked past her cell, she barely looked up. When Bradley threw an insult, she didn't react. She moved slower, spoke less, became invisible. It worked. They stopped watching her, stopped questioning whether she was listening, stopped thinking she was anything other than a prisoner waiting for the inevitable. But Angela was not waiting. She was preparing. Every word she heard, every conversation she pieced together was a weapon. And when the time came, she wouldn't just escape. She would burn this whole operation to the ground. Angela had spent days in the darkness of her cell, listening, observing, waiting. She had learned the routines, the shifts, the voices that drifted through the station like whispers of a dying empire. Bradley and Jenkins still believed she was nothing but a broken woman waiting for her inevitable fate. They had no idea she was already plotting their downfall, but she couldn't do it alone. She needed a crack in their fortress, an opening, and she found one. A young officer. She didn't know his name at first, but she knew his type. The kind that had joined the force with a sense of duty, wanting to do the right thing, only to find himself trapped in a system rotten to its core. She had seen the way he looked at her when he passed by her cell. Unlike the others, his gaze wasn't filled with contempt or amusement. It was filled with guilt, and guilt was something she could use. The opportunity came late one night. Angela was slumped in the corner of her cell, her breathing shallow, body aching from the latest round of lessons Jenkins and Bradley had delivered. But even through the pain, her mind was sharp, her senses tuned to every sound in the building. And then there it was, the soft shuffle of hesitant footsteps, the brief hesitation outside her cell door. She didn't look up immediately. Timing was everything. A moment of silence, then a voice. "You shouldn't be here." Angela lifted her head slowly, letting the dim light from the hallway illuminate the bruises on her face, the dried blood at the corner of her mouth. She met his gaze not with anger, not with pleading, but with quiet calculation. "And yet, here I am." Her voice was hoarse but steady. "Funny how that works." The young officer, early 20s, sharp eyes, uncertainty written all over his face, shifted uncomfortably. "Look," he muttered, glancing over his shoulder. "I don't know what you did, but I didn't do anything." Silence. Angela let the words hang between them, watching the flicker of doubt in his eyes. "You know that, don't you?" she pressed, her voice lower now, pulling him in. "You've known it since the moment they brought me in." His throat bobbed as he swallowed. "It's not my call." Angela exhaled, tilting her head slightly. "But it is your conscience." That hit its mark. The young officer flinched, his fingers tightening around the keys on his belt. Angela saw it then, the crack, the hesitation, the part of him that still wanted to believe in justice. She just had to push it open. "You don't have to help me." Angela's voice was calm, controlled. "But ask yourself this, how many more people are locked in this place? Just like me? How many have been buried before you ever had the chance to notice?" His jaw tightened. "I can't." "Yes, you can." She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto his. "One message. That's all I need. You don't have to break me out. You don't even have to get involved. Just pass along a message. Let someone know where I am. That's it." He hesitated. Angela waited, knowing the battle was happening inside him now. The war between what he had been told and what he knew was right. Finally, he exhaled. "What do you want me to say?" Angela's heart hammered against her ribs, but her face remained unreadable. She gave him the information in coded language, a sequence of words that meant nothing to the untrained ear, but would tell her people everything they needed to know. FBI, Rustwood. Corruption runs deeper. That was all it would take. If her team got the message, they would come for her. The young officer nodded just once, then turned, disappearing down the hall before he could change his mind. Angela leaned back against the cold wall of her cell, closing her eyes for a brief moment. She had just set something into motion. Now all she had to do was survive long enough to see it through. Angela had learned to measure time in the sound of footsteps, the clatter of boots outside her cell, the lazy drawl of Jenkins as he passed, the distant murmur of conversations she wasn't supposed to hear. Every noise told her something, and she had spent days, maybe weeks, listening, memorizing, waiting. But today was different. They pulled her out of the darkness, yanking her to her feet with rough hands. No explanation, no warning. Just the sharp bite of cuffs around her wrists and the shove of a baton against her spine. "Time for a little walk, sweetheart," Jenkins sneered, his voice thick with amusement. "Let's stretch those pretty legs." Angela didn't respond. She kept her head low, her breathing steady. She had learned that silence was her best weapon. Jenkins thought she was beaten. He had no idea she was watching. They dragged her through the back hallway of the station, the air stale with the scent of sweat and cigarette smoke. The station wasn't big, but it was cluttered stacks of unfiled paperwork, a flickering security monitor, a coffee maker long overdue for cleaning. But Angela wasn't focused on any of that. She was focused on the door left slightly open down the hall. Jenkins and another officer were ahead of her, exchanging lazy conversation about nothing, their guard down. And that's when she saw it. A man, dressed in a tailored suit, standing just inside an office. His presence was out of place, too polished, too clean for a station like this. And then Angela saw the exchange. Jenkins reached out, taking a thick envelope from the man's hand. Cash. Angela's pulse quickened. A bribe. She memorized every detail. The businessman's sharp features, his slicked back hair, the way Jenkins palmed the money like he'd done it 1,000 times before. And then she heard it. The next shipment moves in 2 days, the businessman murmured. Make sure there aren't any complications. Jenkins smirked, tucking the envelope into his jacket. You let us worry about that. Angela kept her expression blank, but her mind was racing. This wasn't just dirty cops pocketing bribes. This was organized crime. And Jenkins wasn't at the top. He was just another piece in the machine. Angela had suspected corruption. But this was bigger. Smuggling, laundering, seized assets being funneled into private hands. This wasn't just about her anymore. They shoved her into a chair in a small interrogation room, and Jenkins leaned in close, grinning like he was enjoying himself. You see something you like, sweetheart? Angela held his gaze, her expression unreadable. She didn't need to respond. Jenkins chuckled, shaking his head. You know, people like you always think they're smarter than they really are. Angela smiled just a flicker, just enough to make his confidence waver. And men like you, she said quietly, always think no one is watching. The grin dropped from his face. For the first time, Angela saw it, the hesitation, the crack in his armor. Jenkins knew she had seen something. Angela leaned back in her chair, bruised wrists resting against the edge of the table. You're sloppy, Jenkins. Her voice was almost bored. Bribes in broad daylight? Corrupt deals inside the station? You think no one notices? Jenkins stiffened. Bradley walked in, tossing a file onto the table. A distraction. They wanted to shift the focus back onto her, but Angela had already won this round. She had seen too much. She had confirmation. And now there was only one thing left to do. She had to get out. Because if she didn't, this entire operation would keep running, unchecked, buried under the weight of silence. Angela Hayes had come to expose corruption. Now she was going to burn it to the ground. Angela sat in the darkness of her cell, her back pressed against the cold, damp wall. Every inch of her body ached from the relentless beatings, but pain had long since become background noise. Her mind was sharp, her will unbroken. She had done what she needed to do. The message had been sent. Somewhere out there her people were coming. She just had to survive long enough to meet them. But waiting had never been her style. Angela Hayes wasn't going to wait for a rescue. She was going to free herself. The heavy clang of boots echoed down the hallway. Bradley. Angela didn't have to see him to know it was always the same arrogant stomp, the same slow, deliberate pace meant to intimidate. He wanted her to hear him coming. The door creaked open, and Bradley stepped in, smirking. Enjoying your stay? He sneered, crossing his arms. Angela looked up, her expression unreadable. She had spent days letting them think she was broken, compliant. Now she just had to push him over the edge. You seem nervous, Bradley, she said, her voice calm despite the storm brewing in her chest. Worried someone might be on to you? Bradley's smirk twitched. Oh, sweetheart, he chuckled, shaking his head. You really don't get it, do you? There is no one coming for you. No one cares. You're just another ghost in a cell, another case that won't make it past the first page. Angela tilted her head slightly, studying him. Funny, she mused. I was just thinking the same thing about you. Bradley's amusement vanished. Angela saw it then, the flicker of anger, the bruised ego, the crack in his control. That was all she needed. Bradley took a step forward, his presence looming over her. I think you need another lesson in respect. Angela smiled. Then come and teach me. Bradley's hand shot out to grab her, and Angela moved. She exploded upward, her hands slamming into his throat, driving him backward. He stumbled, caught off guard, his body colliding with the wall. Angela didn't hesitate, didn't waste a second. She drove her knee into his ribs, her elbow slamming down onto his forearm before he could reach for his weapon. His breath whooshed out in a painful grunt. He lashed out blindly, but Angela was already behind him. One swift movement, she grabbed his head and smashed it against the steel bars of her cell. Bradley collapsed, unconscious. Angela crouched over his limp body, ripping the keys from his belt. Her fingers trembled, not from fear, but from the sheer adrenaline coursing through her veins. She exhaled, steadying herself. Now it was time to go. Angela moved fast, silent, precise. She navigated the dimly lit hallways, her ears tuned to every sound. The station was understaffed at this hour. That was their mistake. She made it to the back door, the emergency exit, locked. Angela jammed the key into the panel, her pulse hammering. A second too long, and she'd be caught. The lock clicked. She pushed the door open and stepped into the night. Freedom. For the first time in days, Angela breathed in the crisp air, her body soaking in the relief. But there was no time to celebrate. She had work to do. She had evidence to find. Angela moved through the shadows, her stolen police jacket pulled tight over her shoulders to mask her presence. She knew where she needed to go. She had overheard Jenkins talking about it. A warehouse on the outskirts of town. The place where Bradley and Jenkins had hidden everything. Bribes, seized assets, the skeletons of every crime they had committed. Angela wasn't just running. She was going to take them down. She reached the warehouse, her fingers brushing against the cool metal of the door. She pushed it open, and inside she found the proof that would destroy them all. Don't blink, this battle for justice is far from over. The most jaw-dropping twists are still ahead. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a single shocking, heart-pounding moment. Thank you for standing with us in the fight for truth and justice. Angela slipped through the heavy metal doors of the warehouse, the cold night air vanishing as she stepped into the dimly lit interior. The scent of dust, motor oil, and old paper filled the space, mingling with the faint hum of fluorescent lights flickering overhead. Rows of metal shelves stretched into the darkness, stacked high with boxes, crates, and locked filing cabinets. The place wasn't just a storage unit, it was a graveyard of dirty secrets. Angela moved swiftly, her heart pounding, but her hands steady. This was it. The proof she needed to bring Bradley, Jenkins, and their entire operation crashing down. She pulled out her phone, flipping it to camera mode. Every document, every file, every hidden stash of dirty money, she captured it all. Case reports with altered evidence, confiscated weapons with filed-off serial numbers, records of illegal asset seizures, and then she found it, a ledger. Angela's breath caught as she flipped through the pages. Names, transactions, wire transfers, a tangled web of corruption linking not just Bradley and Jenkins, but powerful figures far beyond Rustwood. This wasn't just about two dirty cops. This was a full-scale criminal empire. Angela clenched her jaw, snapping more pictures, burning every detail into memory. She wasn't just exposing a conspiracy. She was about to bring hell to everyone involved. But then a sound, boots on gravel. Angela's blood ran cold. They had found her. A loud bang echoed as the warehouse doors slammed shut. The fluorescent lights above flickered once, then shut off completely. Darkness. Angela froze, every muscle coiled. She wasn't alone anymore. Then a voice, cold, mocking. You really should have stayed locked up, sweetheart. Bradley. Angela exhaled slowly, her mind racing. The air shifted behind her movement. She spun just as a shadow lunged. Angela ducked low, the attacker's fist whistling past her head. She twisted, driving her elbow into his ribs before shoving him back into a stack of crates. But more were coming, at least 3 of them, and Bradley was somewhere in the dark watching. You think you're smart, don't you? His voice echoed through the space. Think you can walk in here and steal from us? Angela moved fast, weaving between the shelves. She needed to get out, but first she needed to send the evidence. She flicked open her phone, her fingers moving fast. One message, one location, send. A heavy thud behind her. A flashlight flooded the aisle in front of her, exposing her position. Then the gunfire started. Angela barely had time to react before the first gunshot ripped through the air. The muzzle flash illuminated the warehouse for a split second, long enough for her to see the barrel aimed directly at her. She dove behind a stack of crates, bullets shredding through wood and metal where she had just stood. Find her! Bradley's voice boomed through the warehouse, thick with rage. Angela's pulse pounded, but her hands were steady as she checked her stolen pistol, one magazine, half empty. Not enough. She peeked around the crates, counting the threats. 3 men moving down the aisle to her left, 2 more near the entrance. And Bradley, waiting, watching. Angela inhaled slowly. She needed a way to shift the fight. Then she saw a forklift parked near the back, its engine still humming. She adjusted her grip on the gun. Time to move. Angela pushed off the ground, rolling to the side as another round of gunfire shredded through the crates. She fired twice center mass. The first officer staggered, his gun slipping from his grasp as he crumpled to the floor. The second dove behind a steel pillar, barking orders into his radio. They were still underestimating her. Angela sprinted toward the forklift, her boots pounding against the concrete. Gunfire erupted behind her, bullets ricocheting off metal. "Move in! Corner her!" Angela ignored them. She slid behind the forklift, yanking the gear into reverse. With a growl of the engine, the machine lurched backwards straight into the stack of crates behind it. The entire structure collapsed like dominoes, sending a cascade of steel and wood crashing down onto two officers. Angela didn't wait for them to recover. She vaulted over the wreckage, gun raised. Two more shots. Another man down. The others hesitated, she could feel it. "She's one woman, damn it!" Bradley barked. "Kill her!" Angela's lips curled. "Then come and get me." The warehouse erupted with gunfire. Angela moved like a ghost, weaving between shelves, ducking under falling debris. She counted every shot, tracking their movements, waiting for the right moment. Then she heard it, the click. An officer's gun empty. Angela sprang forward, grabbing a loose metal rod from the ground. One swing, the impact sent the man crashing to the floor, his weapon skidding across the ground. She grabbed it. Fresh magazine, fully loaded. Angela turned, gun raised, too late. A fist slammed into her ribs, knocking the wind from her lungs. She staggered back. Bradley in front of her now, his own gun leveled at her head. "You should have stayed down, Hayes." Angela's breath came in sharp gasps, her body screaming from the impact of Bradley's punch. She had fought hard, but now she was cornered. Bradley stood in front of her, his gun trained at her skull. His finger hovered over the trigger, rage burning in his eyes. Around them, the warehouse was in ruins, shattered crates, blood-stained concrete, and the bodies of his fallen men. But still Bradley stood. "You should have stayed down, Hayes," he growled. Angela's fingers twitched against the grip of her stolen gun, but she knew she was out of time. She couldn't dodge a bullet from this range. Bradley saw her shift and sneered. "Thinking about one last move? Don't bother?" Angela didn't move, didn't blink. She didn't have to, because at that moment the night exploded with light and sound. Sirens, engines roaring, voices booming through megaphones. "Federal agents! Drop your weapons!" The entire warehouse froze. Angela saw the flicker of fear in Bradley's eyes, the realization crashing down on him. He had lost. A second later, the first flashbang detonated. The explosion of white light and concussive force rocked the entire building. Bradley stumbled back, cursing, his aim thrown off for just a second. A second was all Angela needed. She lunged forward, grabbing his wrist and twisting it with all the strength she had left. Bang! The shot fired, but it missed. The gun clattered to the ground. Bradley roared in fury, swinging at her, but Angela was faster. She drove her knee into his ribs, sending him staggering backward. More explosions rang out as the FBI breached the warehouse from all sides. Flashlights cut through the darkness, agents flooding the scene like a wave. Gunfire erupted as the last of Bradley's men tried to fight back, but they were outnumbered. Angela turned, just in time to see Jenkins trying to slip out through the back exit. Not a chance. Angela took off after him, pain ripping through her body, but she didn't care. Jenkins wasn't getting away. He sprinted toward a black SUV parked outside the warehouse, fumbling for the keys in his pocket. He was panicked now, desperate. Come on," he muttered, yanking the door open. Angela was on him before he could climb in. She grabbed the back of his jacket and ripped him backward, slamming him against the side of the car. "You're not going anywhere, Jenkins." He swung at her, but Angela ducked, driving her fist into his stomach. He doubled over, gasping. Behind them, the FBI had taken full control of the warehouse. Officers were dragged out one by one, weapons confiscated, hands zip-tied behind their backs. Bradley, still groaning on the ground, was pinned down by two agents. His face was twisted in rage and disbelief. His empire was crumbling before his eyes. Angela turned back to Jenkins. "Last chance," she said, her voice calm but sharp as a blade. "Tell me everything. Who else is involved?" Jenkins shook his head violently. "You think this is over? You think locking us up is going to fix anything? Angela stared at him. Number, but it's a start. A second later, an agent grabbed Jenkins, slamming his hands behind his back and cuffing him. You're done, the agent growled. Angela watched as Jenkins was hauled away, still muttering curses under his breath. Finally, it was over. Bradley sat on the ground, his hands cuffed behind him, blood trailing from his split lip. He looked up as Angela approached. You should have killed me, he muttered. Angela crouched down, meeting his eyes. You should have never underestimated me, she replied. Bradley smirked, but it was weak now, hollow. This town belongs to men like me, he whispered. Angela tilted her head slightly, watching him crumble. Not anymore. As the flashing red and blue lights bathed the night, agents swarmed the scene, cataloging evidence, escorting officers into waiting vehicles. Angela let out a slow breath. For the first time in days, she felt something close to peace. Bradley's reign was over, and Rustwood would never be the same again. This is just the tip of the iceberg. Things are about to take a jaw-dropping turn. You won't believe what's coming next. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss a single second of this shocking, high-stakes drama. The flashing red and blue lights of FBI vehicles painted streaks of color across the crumbling walls of the warehouse. Smoke still hung in the air, thick with the scent of gunpowder, sweat, and the fading stench of fear. Angela stood in the center of the chaos, her body battered, her clothes torn, but her eyes sharp, focused. She had fought to make it this far, clawed her way through bribes, violence, and a system built to silence people like her. And now the truth was out in the open. Bradley and his men had been taken down, but the real damage wouldn't be done with bullets. It would be done with evidence, and Angela had plenty of it. FBI agents swarmed the warehouse, cataloging everything: stacks of cash, weapons with serial numbers filed off, files of fabricated police reports. But nothing was as damning as what Angela had found. A leather-bound ledger, its pages stained with age and greed. Inside, names, dates, wire transfers, every bribe, every transaction, every dirty deal Bradley and his men had covered up for years. Angela stood over the open crates of evidence, her fingers brushing the edge of the ledger as an FBI agent stepped beside her. We've got everything we need, he said, flipping through the pages, his face darkening with every line he read. Angela exhaled. No more cover-ups, she muttered. The agent looked at her, nods of silent agreement passing between them. This wasn't just about Bradley. This was about the entire Rustwood Police Department. By dawn, the news had already spread. A federal convoy transported the evidence straight to Washington. Agents worked through the night, combing through files, digital records, and surveillance tapes recovered from the warehouse. And by morning, the first arrests began. The Rustwood PD, once an untouchable force of terror, began crumbling from within. One by one, officers were pulled from their homes, their desks, their precincts. Some went quietly. Others didn't. Angela watched from a distance as squad cars lined up outside the Rustwood Police Department, the same building where she had been locked up, beaten, left to rot. And now, it was being raided. Jenkins was dragged out first, kicking, screaming. You think this changes anything? He bellowed, his voice cracking as they forced him into the back of a police van. Angela's lips pressed into a thin line. Yes, she murmured, I do. One after another, officers followed, some cursing, some silent, their faces pale as the system they had built turned against them. The town of Rustwood, long held captive by corruption and fear, stood still. Civilians gathered on the streets, watching, whispering, realizing. And then the first cheer. It started small, a murmur in the crowd. Then it grew. The people who had spent years under the boot of a corrupt police force finally saw justice taking shape. Angela let out a slow breath. It wasn't over, but for the first time, it felt like something had finally begun. Words spread like wildfire through Rustwood. The news broke just before dawn, and by sunrise, the streets were already buzzing. Neighbors whispered in disbelief, clustering in stunned silence around televisions and radios broadcasting every chilling detail. Angela stood quietly near the edge of the crowd, watching as everything unraveled with swift, merciless precision. The FBI had moved swiftly, arresting Bradley, Jenkins, and nearly a dozen other officers linked to their twisted operation. Photographs from the raid flashed across every TV screen, images of officers, once arrogant and untouchable, now marched through the courthouse doors in handcuffs, their faces etched with humiliation and disbelief. It was a sight the citizens of Rustwood had never imagined they'd witness. The courthouse steps became the center of the storm. News vans lined the streets, reporters clamoring to capture every detail of the stunning downfall of the once powerful police force. Locals gathered outside the courthouse, at first in silent disbelief, then in growing numbers as courage overcame fear. Angela watched from a distance, a small smile of satisfaction breaking through the exhaustion she felt. The town, once trapped in an iron grip of corruption and terror, was finally finding its voice. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with electricity as the charges were read aloud. Bribery, extortion, assault, abuse of power. Angela's detailed evidence, the photos, the documents, the ledger of bribes and illicit deals left no room for denial. Bradley sat stiffly in the defendant's chair, eyes narrowed with contempt. Jenkins beside him was visibly shaking, his smug confidence crushed by the reality of justice finally catching up to him. "This is outrageous," Bradley shouted, interrupting the prosecutor. "Do you realize what you're doing? This town would fall apart without us." The judge slammed his gavel down sharply, silencing the outburst. "You've said enough, Officer Bradley. Your actions have brought shame upon the very badge you once swore to uphold. You manipulated, terrorized, and betrayed the people who trusted you to protect them." Angela leaned forward, her gaze unwavering as Bradley sank back into his chair, defeated. His eyes briefly locked onto hers, venomous and bitter, blaming her for his downfall. She didn't flinch, returning his glare with calm resolve. This wasn't about personal vengeance. It was about tearing down a broken system that had thrived on the pain and silence of innocent people. Witnesses came forward one by one, citizens who had previously been too terrified to speak. A mother tremblingly recounted how Jenkins had threatened her son over a minor traffic stop. A small business owner described the constant extortion, forced bribes to avoid fabricated charges. Each testimony peeled back another layer of cruelty, another horrifying detail of unchecked abuse. Angela listened carefully, her chest tightening with anger at each story. She saw the toll the officers' greed had taken on the town, businesses shuttered, families destroyed, innocent people imprisoned. Bradley and Jenkins sat stone-faced, eyes cast downward as the evidence piled against them. The arrogance they'd worn like armor was now shattered, replaced by humiliation and a creeping realization that their reign of terror had truly ended. Outside the courthouse, the crowd continued to swell. Signs appeared, handwritten banners demanding justice. Voices once timid, now rising together in defiance. Angela stepped outside briefly, feeling the energy crackle around her. An elderly man approached, tears in his eyes as he reached for her hand. "I never thought I'd see this day," he said softly, his voice trembling with gratitude. "They made us think they were untouchable." "No one is untouchable," Angela replied firmly, gripping his hand. "Not even men like Bradley." The man's eyes glistened with tears, and he nodded slowly, turning back toward the courthouse steps, his posture straighter than before. Angela watched as more townspeople stepped forward, emboldened by the courage of others. Voices rose in protest, no longer whispers, but powerful declarations demanding accountability. As the proceedings drew to a close, the judge read out the verdict, his voice resonant and unwavering. "Guilty on all counts." The courtroom erupted into a chorus of gasps and whispers, followed quickly by applause that thundered like a wave crashing against the shore. Bradley's head dropped, shoulders shaking as he realized the extent of his defeat. Jenkins sat motionless, his expression hollow, the facade of invulnerability stripped away. Angela remained silent, watching as the officers were led from the courtroom, chains clinking loudly. It was the sound of justice, raw and undeniable, finally being served. As Bradley passed, he turned toward her once more, his voice barely above a whisper, but dripping with venomous hatred. "You'll regret this." Angela met his eyes one last time, her voice quiet but unshakably firm. "The only regret I have is that it didn't happen sooner." Outside, the gathered crowd roared as the convicted officers were led into waiting vehicles. Angela stepped onto the courthouse steps, momentarily overcome by the power of the moment. She had arrived in Rustwood undercover, tasked with nothing more than gathering evidence of corruption. She had endured humiliation, violence, and injustice, but now, standing before this sea of faces, she saw something she'd long hoped to witness: hope. Citizens embraced one another openly, voices growing louder as they realized they were free from fear. Angela watched the joy and relief spreading among them, the realization that their town had finally broken free from oppression. For a brief moment, exhaustion faded, replaced by pride, a pride born from justice served. As the FBI agents moved in formation, taking control of the local precinct, collecting evidence, and removing every remnant of corruption, Angela knew her mission was complete. She glanced toward the horizon, the sun beginning to rise, casting golden rays across Rustwood. A new day was dawning for this town, one that promised truth and integrity. Angela breathed deeply, savoring the moment. Justice had been delivered, but her work wasn't finished yet. Corruption had deep roots, and every victory was merely a step forward. But today was significant, a turning point. Rustwood would stand as proof that justice was possible, even against those who seemed untouchable. Turning to the FBI agent beside her, Angela nodded firmly. "Let's finish this." The agent returned her nod respectfully. "This town owes you everything." "No," Angela replied, watching the citizens celebrating, their spirits renewed. "They earned their freedom. I just gave them the push." She descended the steps, walking toward the crowd that now surged forward to thank her, shaking hands and expressing gratitude with tear-filled eyes. The past injustice hung heavily in their expressions, but now it was tinged with hope, a belief that tomorrow could be different. Angela felt that hope deeply. It was the reason she fought, the reason she refused to give up, no matter how stacked the odds were. Justice wasn't easy, wasn't guaranteed, but it was always worth the fight. Bradley and Jenkins had built their empire on pain, silence, and fear. Today, Angela Hayes tore it down. The afternoon sun cast golden hues across Rustwood, transforming the small courthouse square into a sea of hope and determination. Just days earlier, this place had been shrouded in fear, controlled by men who abused their badges and corrupted justice itself. Now, it echoed with the triumphant cheers of those finally freed from oppression. At the center of it all stood Angela Hayes, silent and dignified, her wounds still fresh beneath her composed exterior. Special Agent Carter stepped forward, the crowd falling into a respectful hush as he approached Angela, holding out an envelope embossed with the seal of the FBI. "Agent Hayes," Carter began, his voice powerful yet gentle, "your bravery has exposed a network of corruption that had terrorized this community for far too long. The FBI owes you a debt of gratitude, and it's my honor to offer you this commendation and a substantial reward for your extraordinary service." A wave of applause swept through the gathered townspeople, their eyes glistening with admiration and gratitude. Angela, however, remained still, her eyes fixed firmly on the envelope. She knew the cost of what she'd done. Every bruise, every scar told a story of resistance against injustice. But accepting recognition had never been her purpose. She had never done this for medals or money. She slowly shook her head, surprising Carter. "Thank you, Agent Carter," Angela replied calmly, her voice steady but firm. "But I can't accept this." A murmur rippled through the crowd, confusion evident on the faces surrounding her. Angela took a deep breath, stepping forward to address them directly. She had stood before them bruised, humiliated, and nearly broken. Yet she stood there now as a symbol not of authority, but of defiance. "You all know me now," Angela began, her words resonating through the silence. "But there are many like you who don't, people in towns just like this. People whose voices are silenced, whose stories go unheard. Rustwood was just one town. Bradley and Jenkins were just two corrupt officers among many. The crowd's energy shifted, sobering as her words settled heavily upon them. Angela continued, her gaze sweeping over the faces gathered, seeing both pain and newfound determination. This fight, Angela said firmly, doesn't end here. Corruption and injustice aren't bound by borders. They fester anywhere good people stay silent out of fear. You've experienced the cruelty of those who abuse power, but you've also felt the strength that comes when ordinary people refuse to remain silent. Angela paused, letting her words sink in deeply. Her thoughts briefly flickered back to the dark moments inside the Rustwood police station, the bruises on her skin reminders of the cruelty she'd faced. She remembered the humiliation, the helplessness Bradley and Jenkins had inflicted upon her. She had felt firsthand what it meant to be powerless. Now her mission was clear. She couldn't rest, couldn't accept praise, not while others still suffered. I appreciate your kindness, Angela resumed, her voice stronger now, but rewards and recognition won't change the world. That change happens right here among you. Justice doesn't come from powerful people handing it down. It comes from ordinary people standing up, unafraid to demand what is rightfully theirs. Several people nodded solemnly, moved by the conviction in her voice. Linda, the waitress who had first shown Angela kindness in the diner, stepped forward from the crowd, tears streaming openly down her face. "But you've done so much," Linda called out, her voice shaking. "How can we repay you?" Angela offered a gentle smile, her heart swelling at the sincerity in Linda's voice. "You already have," she replied softly, "by finally finding your voices, by choosing courage over fear." She paused again, turning to the crowd, her eyes blazing with intensity. "Your fight isn't over, Rustwood. You have the chance now to rebuild your town, to make it a place free from fear, a place governed by fairness, not by the corrupt. The FBI can arrest corrupt officers, but only you can truly change the culture. Only you can refuse to let fear rule your lives ever again." Angela turned back toward Carter, handing him the envelope he had given her. "Give this money to those who've suffered most. They deserve it far more than I do." Carter nodded respectfully, taking back the commendation with visible admiration. Angela then stepped toward her car, the crowd parting for her passage. As she moved, several people reached out to touch her arm gently, their silent gratitude profound and overwhelming. Angela felt their warmth, their renewed strength. She had given them hope, and in return, they'd reminded her why she fought in the first place. As she reached her vehicle, Angela stopped, turning back one final time, her voice cut sharply through the respectful silence, echoing with both urgency and compassion. "Remember this, justice isn't given, it must be demanded. Never wait quietly for those in power to hand you fairness. Take it, fight for it, claim it as your own, because the power to bring about justice has always belonged to you, the people." Her words hung powerfully in the air. The people of Rustwood stood taller, their faces brighter, understanding clearly that the woman who had arrived as a stranger, who had fought for them, who had suffered for their freedom, was not abandoning them. She was trusting them to carry on. Angela climbed into her car, the engine roaring to life. Her journey here had been painful, costly, but it had sparked a fire that now burned brightly within an entire community. Through her rear-view mirror, she watched as Rustwood citizens embraced, united by a common purpose. They waved as she drove away, the town fading into the distance, but the memory of her courage engraved forever in their hearts. On the open highway, Angela Hayes pressed the accelerator gently, feeling the weight of exhaustion and triumph settle upon her shoulders. Rustwood was just the beginning. Countless towns still suffered beneath the oppressive fists of injustice. Her work was far from finished. She knew the road ahead would be long and painful. But Angela was ready. She'd been humiliated, threatened, beaten, nearly broken, but never defeated. Each scar was a badge of honor, a testament to her resolve. She would continue onward, fighting in every forgotten corner, speaking for every silenced voice, tearing down every oppressive empire. Angela drove toward the setting sun, determined and unyielding. Her mission was clear, her heart strong, her mind sharpened by every injustice she'd faced. The FBI's commendation meant nothing to her compared to this, the quiet, unwavering determination to seek justice, no matter the cost. After all, Angela thought as the road stretched endlessly before her, this fight was far bigger than Rustwood. It was bigger than Bradley, bigger than Jenkins. It was a fight for every forgotten soul, every innocent life crushed beneath the weight of corruption. And Angela Hayes was just getting started. Angela's hands tightened around the steering wheel as she drove away from Rustwood, leaving behind a trail of dust illuminated by the fading sun. Through the rear-view mirror, she watched as the town gradually disappeared into the horizon, the distant silhouettes of the courthouse and church steeples shrinking against the golden sky. It felt surreal, almost dreamlike, the way she'd ripped through layers of corruption that had suffocated the town for decades. But the adrenaline that still surged through her veins reminded her that this wasn't just a victory, it was the first battle in a war far from over. In the town she just left, change was already beginning to bloom. Citizens who once cowered in silence had begun to speak openly, confronting years of fear and oppression. The streets echoed with newfound courage as neighbors embraced, tears of relief streaming down their faces. Storefront lights flickered on. Windows that had once been boarded and locked reopened to the cool evening breeze, breathing life into Rustwood again. Angela knew these small acts of bravery were the sparks of something far greater, a flame of justice ignited by her painful sacrifices. Yet Angela couldn't let herself rest. The bruises and cuts she carried were still raw, painful reminders of how fiercely Rustwood's corrupt officers had fought to maintain their power. Bradley and Jenkins were now behind bars, but Angela knew their kind existed everywhere. Men who wore badges like shields, abusing authority, crushing those weaker than themselves with calculated cruelty. The image of Bradley's arrogant sneer still lingered in her mind, fueling her determination. She couldn't forget the way he'd taunted her, the way he'd spat venomous insults meant to break her spirit. As the road stretched endlessly ahead, Angela's phone buzzed sharply, jolting her back to reality. She glanced down at the screen, recognizing the encrypted notification immediately. It was from headquarters, and the urgency in the message was unmistakable. Angela's pulse quickened as she pulled over to the side of the deserted highway, gravel crunching beneath her tires. With trembling fingers, she opened the message. Another situation developing. Local police compromised. Possible human trafficking ring. Victims silenced by authorities. Need immediate infiltration. Angela exhaled slowly, feeling a familiar fire ignite deep within her chest. The message was brief, but it spoke volumes. She closed her eyes briefly, preparing herself for another fight, knowing the cycle of injustice was relentless. She opened her eyes, gripping the phone tighter. Angela knew well that every town held its own Bradley, its own Jenkins men who thrived on silence, fear, and corruption. Men who crushed innocent lives for personal gain. Angela couldn't stand idle, couldn't rest, knowing others still suffered in darkness, voiceless and afraid. As the evening darkened into night, stars beginning to pierce through the violet sky, Angela knew her path was clear. She started the engine again, the rumble breaking through the quiet stillness around her. She pushed the pedal down harder, racing toward another town, another nightmare that needed to be confronted head-on. In that moment, Angela thought of Rustwood, how it had been chained by fear and violence, controlled by men who'd turned law into tyranny. She remembered the faces of those she'd helped, people who now stood proudly, reclaiming their dignity. But she also thought of those she had yet to meet, victims still trapped beneath oppressive shadows, praying desperately for someone brave enough to fight for them. Angela knew exactly why she couldn't stop. Corruption didn't pause, didn't hesitate, it consumed entire communities, thrived in places where hope had vanished. But Angela Hayes wasn't someone who would turn away. She was the one who stepped forward, the one who fought when no one else could. The horizon ahead darkened as the sun sank lower, stretching shadows across the landscape. Angela's heart pounded steadily, each beat a fierce reminder of the stakes. She whispered to herself, her voice steady and filled with quiet resolve. Justice doesn't come from those in power. It comes from those who rise up, from those who refuse to remain silent. This fight never ends, but neither do I. As her car vanished into the twilight, Angela knew she was driving toward another storm. Another place like Rustwood, where people were waiting in silence for someone brave enough to give them back their voices. She was ready for whatever came next because Angela knew that as long as injustice remained, her journey was far from over. If you're inspired by stories with unexpected twists, moral challenges, and the impact of kindness, please support us by giving a like or subscribing to Emotional Journey. We put our heart and soul into each story, and having you here with us truly means the world. Thank you for being part of this journey.